Welcome to Top 10 Archive. Now, we're all about celebrating parents, but we're also not against calling out those deemed less favorable. The following 10 folk are definitely not your average mothers and fathers, representing the worst of what's out there. If there are worse parents, that would be truly frightening. Number 10. Sarah Burge. Some parents like to bestow their children with typical gifts like, a bicycle or action figure. But self-proclaimed human Barbie, Sarah Burge is far from typical. That's why when her daughter Poppy turned 7 years old, she wrapped up a gift voucher for plastic surgery worth roughly $10,000, specifically for breast augmentation, and an additional $11,000 voucher for liposuction. Don't worry, sweet little Poppy can't turn in the vouchers until she turns 18, so there's at least that. But we can't help but think about the poor body image that young Poppy may wind up growing up with.
I just think you're dreadful, and I honestly don't want to talk to you anymore, so I'm just going to stop.
Number 9. Carrie Campbell. Burge may have prepared some cosmetic surgeries for her young daughter, but she at least had the sense to wait until she was old enough to decide when to cash them in. British mom Carrie Campbell took an opposite approach and revealed on Good Morning America that she had administered Botox to her 8-year-old daughter, Brittany. But wait, does Carrie Campbell even exist? Or is this story of questionable parenting the product of, more questionable parenting? Shortly after Brittany was removed from her mother's care, Carrie Campbell stepped forward as Sheena Upton, who stated under oath that the British tabloid The Sun paid her a nominal sum to make up the story. So maybe Campbell, or Upton, didn't inject her daughter with Botox, but it's still mind-boggling that she'd risk her parental reputation for money. Number 8. Felicia Ray McClure. Here's a tip for parents. If you're in need of some quick cash, don't put it upon your children to earn you that money. In the 2011 case of Felicia Ray McClure and her daughter, Felicia sought to make $10,000 by selling the 13-year-old's virginity to a man police identified only as Don. Felicia's then-boyfriend stumbled across text messages between her and Don that explicitly mentioned paying to have sex with the girl. McClure and her daughter's potential lover allegedly enjoyed a fashion show at Victoria's Secret, where the minor modeled bras and thongs for the perverted pair. Before Don was even in the picture, though, McClure was in touch with a man identified as Will, who purchased pornographic pictures of the young girl. Number 7. Joey and Chad Mudd. Children are adverse to doing chores. It's just in their nature. And sometimes parents turn to bribing to get them more motivated. Joey and Chad Mudd took this idea to a whole new level by offering them cocaine and marijuana in exchange for completing chores and schoolwork when needed. At the time of the pair's arrest, the daughters were 13 and 14 years old and were placed in the care of relatives while their unorthodox parents found themselves faced with charges of child abuse and possession of narcotics. Number 6. Sandra and James Davis. Would you sell your daughter's sexuality for a couple of payments on your 12-year-old minivan? If you said no, kudos to you. You're a reasonable, commendable human being, unlike James and Sandra Davis. In 2010, the two were looking for a means to get out of the $281 car payment on a 1998 Dodge minivan purchased at a local used car lot. Instead of actually paying the car note, Sandra and James offered their young daughter's body to the 66-year-old manager of Shorty's Used Cars, Wayne Bearden. It's alleged that Bearden was far from the first person to receive this uncouth method of payment, as it's believed the couple also used their daughter's sexuality for drugs and money. Number 5. Sandra Padilla. Can you imagine a parent who encourages a fight between her 17-year-old child and a 14-year-old girl? Sandra Padilla's own personal fight club landed her in jail after she was recorded cheering during a fight between her daughter and a fellow classmate that she was later found to have facilitated. Allegedly fearing that her daughter and the underclass woman would continue fighting in school, Padilla arranged a brawl between the two and, as the video of the fight shows, cheered her daughter on. The supportive mother can be heard instructing her daughter to bite and hit harder. Things didn't go well for Padilla as she was charged with child abuse. Number 4. Barbara and Kenny Atkinson. Some people just aren't meant to be parents. Take Barbara and Kenny Atkinson, a couple that did just about everything they could do wrong. After giving birth to their daughter Lauren, the two gave the baby up for adoption for 8 months before deciding they wanted her back. For what reason, we're unsure of, because once Lauren was back in their care, her parents subjected her to a regimen of rape, torture, abuse, and isolation for 8 years. Lauren was rescued, ironically, from her mother boasting to their neighbor about the malnourished child. She was only 25 pounds, or roughly 11 kilograms. Kenny and Barbara received life in prison, and the matriarch continues to hold an unusual disdain for her daughter, refusing to mention the girl by name, often referring to her as it or the girl when she does speak of her. Number 3. Eunice Spry. Anyone that could make the Atkinsons look like saints is truly a despicable human being and parent. Enter Eunice Spry. The adoptive and foster mother of Victoria Evans, Christopher Spry, and Aloma Gilbert can only be described as evil. Though she cared for her biological daughter, Judith, and other adoptive daughter, Charlotte, Victoria, Christopher, and Aloma were subjected to an inconceivable level of abuse and torture. On many occasions, Victoria was forced to eat her own vomit or cat food while Christopher was tied to a car and driven across a field. The trio survived countless beatings and bouts of starvation over the course of 19 years before Eunice was arrested and sentenced to 14 years in prison. A year after her sentencing, her time was reduced to 12 years and was released after serving just half of that. Number 2. Joseph Fritzl. Over the course of 24 years, Elizabeth Fritzl underwent a life of sexual abuse by her grotesque father, Joseph. Raped thousands of times by her father, Elizabeth was forced to carry and give birth to 7 children. With the threat of death constantly hanging over her head, the teenager felt she was left with no other choice than to give in to her father's demands, which included violent sex and reenacting scenes from porn movies she was forced to watch, even on occasions forcing Elizabeth's children to watch too. It wasn't until 2008, when Fritzl was forced to take the eldest of Elizabeth's daughters, Kirsten, to the hospital, that everything fell apart. Fritzl's story about Kirsten's condition contained holes that puzzled authorities, sparking police involvement. Elizabeth was eventually questioned by the police and, despite fear of her father's threats, divulged everything, leading to Fritzl's arrest and the March 14, 2009 life sentence. Number 1. Hope Askew. Some children need that extra push to clear educational hurdles, like in the case of Hope Askew's 10-year-old daughter, who was having trouble correctly pronouncing a few words. Miss Askew grew tired of listening to her daughter stumble and sought out a means to inspire her. With a hot iron in hand, Askew pressed it to her daughter's face. Thinking she could use another dose of her archaic punishment, she did it a second time. When school officials noticed the youth's unusual scarring, the police were called, and, when questioned, Askew was unsurprisingly creative with her story, stating it was an accident with a skillet. The daughter was a little more upfront with social workers, relaying her encounter with the hot iron.